Wyoming Territory, 1873. The harsh winter winds howled across the snow-covered plains, battering the small ranch house that stood defiant against the elements. Inside, Yates Sutton, a 25-year-old cowboy with shoulders already bearing the weight of responsibilities beyond his years, stared out the frosted window. The flickering light of the oil lamp cast shadows across his handsome features. High cheekbones, strong jaw with light stubble, and eyes that had seen too much sorrow for someone so young. "Uncle Yates." "Emma won't share the blanket," came a small voice from across the room. Yates turned from the window, running a hand through his sandy brown hair. "Thomas, you've got your own blanket. Let your sister be." In the corner of the modest living room, two children, 6-year-old Thomas and 4-year-old Emma, huddled near the fireplace. Their innocent faces bore an unmistakable resemblance to Yates's brother James, a painful reminder of what had been lost. 8 months had passed since James and his wife Sarah had succumbed to typhoid, leaving their children orphaned. Without hesitation, Yates had stepped in, abandoning his carefree existence as a ranch hand to take over his brother's struggling homestead and raise his niece and nephew. "The frontier is no place for softness," Yates muttered to himself as he added another log to the dying fire. It was a mantra he'd adopted young, reinforced when he'd lost his parents, and cemented when he'd buried his brother and sister-in-law. Everyone he'd ever loved had been taken by this harsh, unforgiving land. He wouldn't make the mistake of opening his heart again. All he wanted now was to keep these children safe, to build something stable for them. What he needed, connection, understanding, perhaps even love, he'd long ago decided wasn't meant for men like him. The West demanded strength, not vulnerability. Independence, not interdependence. As he tucked the children into bed that night, Thomas looked up with eyes too knowing for a child. "Uncle Yates, are you lonely?" The question struck like an unexpected blow. "I've got you too," he answered, forcing a smile. "Now go to sleep." But long after the children's breathing had steadied into slumber, Yates sat at the kitchen table, ledger open before him, numbers that wouldn't balance swimming before his tired eyes. The ranch was failing. Without help, they wouldn't last another year. The following morning dawned bright and cold. Yates had just finished feeding the livestock when he spotted a wagon approaching along the snow-covered road. Visitors were rare this time of year, especially with the pass nearly snowed in. As the wagon drew closer, he noticed a slender figure at the reins, a woman, her face obscured by a blue woolen bonnet. Beside her sat an older man with a gray beard. "Whoa there," she called to the horses, pulling them to a stop. When she looked up, Yates felt an unexpected jolt. The woman was young, no more than 22, with striking blue eyes and blonde hair peeking from beneath her bonnet. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her smile was warm enough to melt the snow around them. "Mr. Sutton?" she asked, her voice clear as a bell in the winter air. Yates nodded, suddenly aware of his disheveled appearance. "I'm Violet Northcott. This is my father, Dr. Edwin Northcott. We've come from Denver." She wore a practical blue dress beneath her heavy coat, simple but well-made. "I believe you requested a schoolteacher for the district." Yates stared, confused. "The town council did, ma'am, but that was months ago. Most figured no one would come, especially not in winter." Dr. Northcott cleared his throat. "The position was only recently brought to our attention. My daughter is fully qualified, having taught in Denver for 2 years. And you're the council representative for this area?" Violet asked, consulting a folded paper. "No, ma'am. I'm just a rancher. With 2 school-aged children, according to the records," she added with a smile that seemed to brighten the gray winter day. The realization struck him. "My niece and nephew. My brother's children." Something in his tone must have conveyed the rest, because compassion flashed across Violet's face. "I see," she said softly. "Well, Mr. Sutton, is there somewhere in town I might find lodging until proper arrangements can be made?" Yates glanced toward the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering. "Town's 15 miles south, and there's a storm coming. You wouldn't make it before nightfall." He hesitated, then added reluctantly, "You're welcome to shelter here until morning." As Violet stepped down from the wagon, her smile seemed to carry warmth into his cold, empty home, a warmth he'd convinced himself he didn't need and couldn't afford to welcome. The storm that night was fiercer than expected, trapping the Northcotts at the Sutton Ranch for 3 days. During that time, Yates observed Violet with his niece and nephew. She taught them letters and numbers by the firelight, told them stories, and brought laughter back into rooms that had known only grief for too long. Emma, normally shy around strangers, bloomed under Violet's gentle attention, while Thomas followed her around like a devoted puppy. On the third evening, after the children were asleep, Yates found Violet in the kitchen, wrapping potatoes in cloth. "What are you doing?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She glanced up, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Making hot stones. Emma mentioned her feet get cold at night. You don't need to do that." "I know." She continued her work. "I want to." Yates washed her hands, delicate but capable. "Why did you really come out here, Miss Northcott? Denver has fine schools. Why choose a frontier teaching position?" Violet's movement stilled. "Perhaps I wanted something different." She met his gaze steadily. "Not everyone fears the challenges of frontier life, Mr. Sutton." "I don't fear it," he countered. "I respect it. This land takes more than it gives." "Does it?" She glanced toward the children's room. "It seems to me it's given those children you." Her words unsettled him, challenging the belief that had anchored him since his parents' deaths. When the roads finally cleared, Yates drove the Northcotts to town. The schoolhouse, a small building that had stood empty for nearly a year, was in disrepair. The town council was apologetic but offered little help beyond a small salary and a room above the general store for Violet. "It's not what was promised," Yates found himself saying as they surveyed the dilapidated schoolhouse. Violet shrugged. "It's a beginning. I'll make it work." That evening, returning to his ranch, Yates found the house unnaturally quiet. The children were subdued, Emma clutching the cloth-wrapped potato that Violet had made for her. "Will Miss Violet come back?" Thomas asked during supper. "She's the teacher now," Yates explained. "You'll see her when school starts." "But that's so far away," Emma said sadly. Yates looked at their downcast faces and made a decision that would change everything. "How would you like to help fix up the schoolhouse?" Over the next weeks, Yates found reasons to be in town more often than he'd been in the entire previous year. He repaired the schoolhouse roof, built new benches, and brought firewood. Each time, Violet was there, painting walls, sewing curtains, or arranging the few books she'd brought from Denver. "You don't have to do all this," she told him one afternoon as they worked side by side. "The children need a proper school," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Is that the only reason?" The question hung in the air between them. Finally, he looked at her, really looked, and saw something that frightened him more than any frontier danger. "Hope. It's reason enough," he said, turning back to his work. By early March, the school was ready to open. 7 children from the surrounding homesteads joined Thomas and Emma for classes. Yates, who had planned to simply drop the children off, found himself lingering, watching Violet through the window as she led the students in their lessons, her face animated, her blue eyes bright with purpose. On his way back to the ranch, he encountered Dr. Northcott leaving a patient's home. "Your daughter is a fine teacher," Yates offered. The older man studied him thoughtfully. "She is, though I worry about her out here. A young woman alone. The town seems safe enough." "It's not danger I fear, Mr. Sutton. It's loneliness." He sighed. "Violet has always given herself completely to others, her students, her patients when she assists me. But who takes care of her?" The question followed Yates home, echoing in his mind as he worked the ranch alone, the house emptier now during school hours. Who was taking care of any of them, really? He'd been so focused on survival, on keeping the promises he'd made to his brother, that he'd forgotten about living. Spring brought new challenges. A late frost threatened the early crops. The old ranch house roof began to leak. And worst of all, the bank in town changed hands, with the new manager reviewing all outstanding loans, including the one Yates had taken to keep the ranch afloat after James died. "I need more time," Yates explained to the stone-faced banker. "The terms were clear, Mr. Sutton. Payment is due in full by May 15th. It was an impossible sum. Without the ranch, Yates would have nothing to offer Thomas and Emma. No home, no future, no connection to their parents. That night, unable to sleep, he rode into town. The lights were still on in the small room above the general store. Without planning to, he found himself knocking on Violet's door. She answered in a simple house dress, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, a book in her hand. "Yates? Is everything all right? Are the children?" "They're fine. Sleeping at the Wilsons' farm." He stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I shouldn't have come." But you did. She stepped back. Come in. Inside her small room, books were stacked on every surface. A collection of pressed flowers sat on the windowsill. It was a space filled with life and curiosity. The bank is calling in my loan, he said abruptly. I'll lose the ranch. Violet's expression softened. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? No. He looked around, suddenly unsure why he'd come. I needed to tell someone. You've been carrying everything alone for too long, she said gently. The simple truth of her words broke something loose inside him. Before he knew what was happening, he was telling her everything. About James and Sarah, about his promise to care for the children, about his fear of failing them, about his parents' deaths when he was 14 and James 18, and how they'd sworn to look after each other. James was the steady one, he said, staring down at his hands. I was always restless, moving from ranch to ranch. He's the one who should be here for those kids, not me. But you are here, Violet said, moving to sit beside him. And you're exactly what they need. A failing rancher about to lose their home. A man who puts them first, who shows up every day, even when it's hard. She hesitated, then placed her hand over his. Who teaches them that loving someone is worth the risk. Yates looked at their joined hands, then at her face, open, unguarded, offering something he'd convinced himself he could never have. I should go, he said, standing abruptly. The walls he'd built were cracking, and it terrified him. Violet rose too, but didn't try to stop him. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't facing down danger, Yates. Sometimes it's facing what you want most. He left without answering, riding back to the empty ranch house with her words echoing in his mind. The following weeks passed in a blur of desperate activity. Yates took on extra work breaking horses at neighboring ranches. He sold what livestock he could spare, but as May approached, he was still far short of the sum needed. Meanwhile, Thomas and Emma thrived under Violet's teaching. They came home with stories and drawings and new words. They spoke of Miss Northcott constantly, how she'd shown them to make a prism with water, how she knew stories about faraway places, how she'd promised to take the class on a nature expedition when the weather warmed. Miss Violet asked if you'd come too, Uncle Yates, Emma said one evening. For protection. From what? He asked, amused despite his worries. Bears, Thomas answered seriously. And outlaws. Did she now? Yates couldn't help but smile at the thought. The expedition was planned for the second Saturday in May, just days before the loan was due. Yates had resigned himself to loss by then, making quiet arrangements to move the children to a small cabin he'd rented in town after the foreclosure. The morning of the expedition dawned clear and warm. Yates accompanied the small group, Violet, her 9 students, and 2 other parents, to a meadow near the creek. While the children collected flowers and insects under Violet's direction, Yates found himself walking alongside her. You've been avoiding town, she observed, her blue eyes direct. Been busy. Too busy to say hello when you drop off the children? When he didn't answer, she continued, I've heard about the loan. Is there truly no solution? None I've found. He kicked at a stone. We'll move to town after. The children can still attend school. And the ranch? Your brother's land. Lost. The word tasted bitter. Violet was quiet for a moment. Then, my father received a letter from Denver yesterday. They've offered him a position at the new hospital there. A good position. Yates felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. When do you leave? He leaves next week. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I haven't decided yet. What's keeping you here? The question came out more demanding than he'd intended. Her gaze didn't waver. You know what is. Before he could respond, a child's scream split the air. They both turned to see Thomas backing away from the creek bank, pointing at something in the water. Yates reached them first, spotting immediately what had frightened the boy. A young man lay face down in the shallow water, his body caught against a fallen tree branch. Get the children back, he ordered, wading into the cold water. With Violet's help, he pulled the unconscious man to shore. He was young, no more than 20, with a bloody wound on his temple. He's alive, Violet announced, checking his pulse. We need to get him to my father. They improvised a stretcher from branches and coats, Yates and another parent carrying the stranger, while Violet hurried ahead with the children. By the time they reached town, Dr. Northcott had his instruments ready. Blow to the head, but no water in his lungs, the doctor announced after examining the young man. He's lucky you found him when you did. As they waited for the patient to regain consciousness, Sheriff Miller arrived to investigate. Any identification? Just this. Yates handed over a water-damaged letter they'd found in the young man's pocket. The sheriff's eyebrows rose as he read it. Well, I'll be. Says here he's William Reed, sent by the First Bank of Denver to audit the Willow Creek branch. He looked up. That's our bank. 2 hours later, William Reed awoke, confused but coherent enough to confirm the sheriff's discovery. He'd been sent to investigate discrepancies in the Willow Creek Bank's reports and had been attacked on his way into town, robbed, and left for dead. Manager Hargrove has been skimming funds, Reed explained weakly, using foreclosures to acquire property below market value, then reselling for profit. Denver suspects he's planning to disappear with a substantial sum. The sheriff departed immediately with several deputies. By nightfall, Hargrove was in custody, and William Reed, now recovering at Dr. Northcott's office, had promised a complete review of all the bank's recent actions, including Yates's loan. It appears your loan terms were deliberately altered after signing, Reed told Yates the next day. The original agreement allowed for quarterly payments over 3 years, not full repayment by May. Relief washed over Yates like a cool rain after drought. So the ranch is safe? More than safe. The bank will be offering compensation for the distress caused. Reed smiled weakly. Consider it thanks for fishing me out of that creek. That evening, Yates sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. The weight that had pressed on him for months was lifting, yet he felt strangely unsettled. Something was still unresolved. A wagon approached along the road, and his heart quickened as he recognized Violet at the reins. She wore a simple green dress, her blonde hair braided and draped over one shoulder. I heard the news, she said as she climbed down. About the bank. I'm so happy for you and the children. News travels fast, he observed, offering her a seat beside him on the porch step. Small towns. She smiled, then grew serious. I've made my decision. About Denver. Yates felt his chest tighten. And I'm staying. The children need their teacher. She looked out at the land spreading before them. His land, his brother's land. And I found something here I never expected. The excitement of rescuing drowning bank auditors, he joked weakly. She laughed, the sound clear in the evening air. That too. Her expression sobered. But mainly I found a place where I matter. Where what I do makes a difference. You matter everywhere, Violet, he said quietly. She turned to him, surprise and something warmer in her eyes. When I thought I would lose this place, he continued, the words coming more easily now. It wasn't just the land I was afraid of losing. It was what it represents. A home for Thomas and Emma. A place where they're connected to their parents. He took a breath. But lately, it's become something more. A place where they're happy. Where they're learning to laugh again. He met her gaze. That's because of you. The children are resilient, she said softly. And they have you. I'm not enough. The admission cost him, but it was true. I can teach them to ride and rope and survive out here. But you show them how to live. How to see beauty in small things. He gestured toward the ranch house. Before you came, this was just a place of duty and obligation. Now, she prompted when he trailed off. Now I'm starting to remember what home feels like. The hope in her eyes gave him courage. I've been afraid, he admitted. Not of the frontier or its dangers. Of this. He reached for her hand. Of caring for someone and losing them. But watching you with the children, seeing how you face each day with openness instead of fear, it's changing me. Is that so terrible? She asked, her fingers intertwining with his. It's terrifying, he said honestly. And wonderful. She smiled, and in that smile he saw the future he'd been too afraid to imagine. Not just survival, but joy. Connection. Family. Miss Northcott, he said formally, though his heart was racing. Would you consider taking on one more student? A particularly slow learner when it comes to matters of the heart. Her laugh was like music. Mr. Sutton, I believe that could be arranged. As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, Yates Sutton learned the lesson his brother had known all along. That love wasn't weakness on the frontier. It was strength. It was home. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Yates and Violet were married in the schoolhouse they'd rebuilt together. Thomas proudly served as best man, while Emma scattered flower petals down the aisle. Dr. Northcott, visiting from Denver, gave his daughter away before an audience of students, parents, and neighbors who had become friends. The small ranch house that had once felt too empty now bustled with life. Violet's books filled the shelves, her flowers brightened the windows, and her laughter echoed in rooms that had known too much silence. Under her guidance, the children thrived. Under her love, Yates discovered that opening his heart hadn't made him vulnerable, it had made him whole. On winter evenings, when snow blanketed the land outside, the family gathered around the fire, Yates and Violet, Thomas and Emma, reading stories, planning for spring, building a future together. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Yates would catch Violet's eye across the room and think of how close he'd come to missing this. How his fear had nearly cost him everything that mattered. "What are you thinking about, Uncle Yates?" Thomas asked one such evening, noticing his contemplative expression. Yates looked around at his family, at the love that had walked into his life carrying warmth and a smile, and answered simply, "Home."